Act 1. The Dream. Imagine building the greatest machine in human history, using it 6 times and then smashing the tools so no one could ever build it again. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the history of the moon. It's 1961. You're an engineer, 26 years old, fresh out of MIT, and you've just been hired by a government agency that most Americans can't even pronounce yet, NASA. You show up on your first day in Houston, wearing a short sleeved button down and a tie clip your dad gave you. The parking lot is half gravel. The hallways smell like fresh paint and burnt coffee. Your desk is a metal slab with a rotary phone and a stack of blank paper. You don't even have a proper chair yet, but none of that matters. Because 3 weeks ago, the President of the United States stood in front of Congress and said something that made every nerve in your body fire at once. He said America would land a man on the moon and bring him safely home. Not eventually, not if we can, before the decade is out. The room you work in has no windows, just fluorescent lights, chalkboards, and about 40 people who are quietly losing their minds trying to figure out how to do something that has never been done in the entire history of the human species. Getting a living, breathing person to the surface of a rock 238,000 miles away, having them walk around on it, then getting them back without a single component failing across 5.6 million parts. And you love it. You love the impossible math. You love the 80-hour weeks. You love the feeling that you're building the future with your bare hands. Your wife barely sees you. Your kids draw pictures of rockets because that's the only way they can explain what daddy does. But you tell yourself it's worth it. Because when this works, when that boot print hits the dust, everything changes. And then it does. July 20th, 1969. You're in mission control. The room is dead silent. 600 million people on Earth are watching the same grainy feed on their television sets. And then you hear it. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. The room erupts. Grown men are crying. Someone's cigar falls out of his mouth. You grip the edge of your console so hard your knuckles go white because you're afraid that if you let go, you'll float away. Neil Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface. And a human being is standing on the moon. You helped make that happen. This is the single greatest achievement in the history of your species. The pyramids, the printing press, penicillin, none of it comes close. For one shining moment, every country, every language, every person on this planet looked up at the same sky and felt the same thing. And you think to yourself, this is just the beginning. But here's the thing. It wasn't the beginning. It was the peak. And everything after this moment is a long, slow, quiet fall back to Earth. Act 2. The Cracks. 3 years later, December 1972. You watch Apollo 17 lift off from the launch pad. Commander Gene Cernan and his crew are heading for the moon. You don't know it yet, but this will be the last time any human being leaves low Earth orbit. The last time anyone walks on the moon. Not for a decade, not for a generation, for over 50 years and counting. To understand why, you need to understand what's been happening behind the scenes while the world was watching astronauts bounce around in the lunar dust. When Kennedy made his famous speech, NASA's budget exploded. At its peak in 1966, the agency was eating 4.5% of the entire federal budget. That's roughly $46 billion in today's dollars. In a single year, 400,000 people were working on Apollo. 20,000 companies and universities were feeding the machine. It was the largest peacetime mobilization of brain power and resources in human history. But here's what nobody tells you. The mission was never really about science. It was never about exploration. It was about one thing: beating the Soviets. Pure Cold War chess. The entire Apollo program was an insanely expensive flex designed to prove to the world that American technology, American ideology, American everything was superior to the communist alternative. And the moment Neil Armstrong planted that flag, the game was over. The bet had paid off. And suddenly, the people writing the checks started asking a very uncomfortable question. Why are we still doing this? See, by 1970, America is a very different country than it was in 1961. Vietnam is devouring the budget like a furnace. There are riots in the streets over civil rights. Inflation is climbing. The economy is wobbling. And here's NASA asking for billions more to send guys to pick up rocks on a lifeless desert, 250,000 miles away. The public, Who were glued to their TVS for Apollo 11 can barely be bothered to tune in by Apollo 13. It takes an explosion that nearly kills 3 astronauts to get people to pay attention again, and even then, the interest fades in weeks. You feel the ground shifting under your feet. Budgets are getting slashed. In January 1970, Apollo 20 gets canceled, just scrapped. 9 months later, 2 more missions get the axe. The flights that were supposed to be Apollo 18 and 19. 3 trips to the moon, erased with a pen stroke. Your colleagues start getting pink slips. The hallways that used to hum with urgency start going quiet. And that's when you will learn the most important lesson of your career. The moon was never the destination, it was a trophy. And once America had it on the shelf, nobody wanted to pay for the display case. Act 3. The real reasons they stopped now, the official story is budget cuts. And that's true. But it's like saying the Titanic sank because of water. Technically correct, but it misses the iceberg. Multiple icebergs, actually. The first one, the money. The entire Apollo program cost roughly $25.8 billion at the time. In today's money, that's somewhere between 260 and 300 billion, depending on how you adjust. Per mission, you're looking at roughly 2.7 billion in modern dollars. Every single time they lit that Saturn V, America was essentially burning a small city's annual budget for a 3-day camping trip. And Richard Nixon, who was president by then, had zero interest in writing those checks. Nixon saw Apollo as Kennedy's baby. Kennedy got the glory. Nixon got the bill. He told his advisors he didn't see the need to keep going. And Congress, dealing with Vietnam, inflation, and a restless public, agreed. NASA didn't just lose its budget, it lost its political ROI, return on investment. In the eyes of Washington, the moon was a depreciating asset. Once the flag was in the ground, the interest on that $25 billion debt became too high to pay. They didn't cancel a mission, they liquidated a dream. But here's the second iceberg, and this one's darker. Risk. Every Apollo mission was a coin flip disguised as engineering. NASA's own leadership knew it. Robert Gilruth, the director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, openly said they should stop before they lost someone. George Low, NASA's deputy administrator, all felt the same way. Kennedy's goal had been met. Why keep rolling the dice? And they had good reason to be scared. Apollo 13 almost killed 3 men in April 1970 when an oxygen tank blew apart halfway to the moon. The crew barely survived by using the lunar module as a lifeboat, a contingency that was never designed for that scenario. If that explosion had happened during a different phase of the mission, at a different angle, with even slightly different timing, those 3 astronauts would have died slowly, 200,000 miles from the nearest hospital, while the whole world listened. But it gets worse. In August 1972, between Apollo 16 and Apollo 17, one of the strongest solar radiation events ever recorded erupted from the sun. A massive particle storm that would have flooded any spacecraft in deep space with potentially lethal doses of radiation. If either of those missions had launched just a few months earlier or later, the astronauts could have been caught in the open with nothing but a thin aluminum hull between them and a wave of energetic protons screaming at near light speed. NASA had no real defense against this, no warning system, no radiation shelter, nothing. The Apollo astronauts were essentially sprinting through a cosmic shooting gallery with their eyes closed, and they got lucky every single time. And the Van Allen belts. You know about those, right? 2 massive rings of trapped radiation encircling the Earth like invisible donuts of charged particles. Every Apollo mission had to fly straight through them. The strategy? Well, go fast and hope for the best. The astronauts spent about 30 minutes to an hour inside those belts, absorbing radiation equivalent to a few chest x-rays. Manageable for a quick trip, but for any long-term presence, any real attempt to stay on the moon, the radiation problem was, and still is, a deal breaker nobody had solved. Now here's the third iceberg, and this is the one that rarely gets talked about. NASA traded the moon for the shuttle. That's not a metaphor. That's literally what happened. NASA leadership looked at their shrinking budget and realized they couldn't afford to keep flying Apollo missions and develop the next generation of spacecraft at the same time. So they made a choice. They proposed canceling the remaining moon missions to free up money and hardware for the space shuttle program. One Saturn V rocket that would have gone to the moon got repurposed to launch Skylab, America's first space station. Think about that. NASA voluntarily gave up the moon, not because they were forced to, because they bet on the future. They figured, we'll build a reusable shuttle, we'll build a space station, and eventually we'll go back to the moon bigger and better. It was a calculated gamble, and in some ways it paid off. They got the shuttle, they got the ISS. But the part about going back to the moon, that promise just evaporated, decade after decade. The engineers who built Apollo, people like you in this story, watched the Saturn V production lines shut down. The tooling was scrapped. The institutional knowledge started dying with the people who held it. Two fully assembled Saturn V rockets. Their rockets that could have gone to the moon ended up as lawn ornaments at NASA visitor centers in Houston and Florida, the most powerful machines ever built by human hands, rusting in the rain. Act 4, what they found and what it means. But here's where the story takes a turn that most people don't expect. Before they stopped going, the astronauts found things on the moon. Strange things. Things that still don't have clean explanations. On the Apollo 10 mission, 2 months before the actual moon landing, astronauts Tom Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan were orbiting the far side of the moon. Picture this. The far side is the part of the moon that never faces Earth. As your spacecraft drifts behind it, the Earth disappears below the lunar horizon. Your radio crackles once, then goes dead. No signal from Houston, no signal from anyone. You are now in a zone of absolute electromagnetic silence. No TV signals, no military chatter, no AM radio from some trucker in Nebraska. Nothing. For roughly 60 minutes. And these three men were the most isolated human beings in the history of the universe, further from contact with their own species than any person had ever been. The Earth wasn't just far away, it was gone, hidden behind 2,000 miles of solid rock. And it was in this silence that their headsets filled with something that shouldn't have been there, an eerie, sustained, high-pitched sound, like a wailing, like a song, like something from a 1950s science fiction movie. Except this was real, and nobody was broadcasting. That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? Cernan said. Who's going to believe it? Nobody, John Young replied. Shall we tell them about it? Cernan paused. I don't know. We ought to think about it some. They were trained test pilots. These were not people who spooked easily. But whatever they heard was disturbing enough that they debated hiding it from mission control. The official explanation, radio interference between the command module and the lunar module's VHF systems. But Apollo 15 astronaut Al Worden, who wasn't on that mission, later said those guys were experienced enough to recognize standard radio interference when they heard it, and this wasn't that. Then there's Apollo 11 itself. On the approach to the moon, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins spotted something outside their window, an object moving alongside them. At first, they assumed it was the detached upper stage of their rocket, the S-4B. They radioed Houston to confirm. Houston told them the S-4B was 6,000 miles away. Whatever they were looking at, it wasn't their rocket. Neil Armstrong later said he couldn't make out the shape. Collins and Aldrin debated whether it looked like a cylinder or an L shape, like an open book. They tracked it for a while, and then it was gone. To this day, there's no consensus on what it was. And Apollo 17 astronauts reported seeing bright flashes of light on the lunar surface. Unexplained impacts, tiny explosions, like someone flicking a lighter on and off across the dark side. Scientists later attributed these to meteoroid strikes, and that's probably what they were. But the takeaway is bigger than any single sighting. The moon is not the quiet, dead rock we were promised. It's a place where your spacecraft gets pelted by micrometeorites, where radiation can spike without warning, where sounds come through your headset that shouldn't be possible, and where objects drift past your window that nobody can identify. And the people who went there, the 12 humans who actually walked on its surface, every single one of them came back changed, not just professionally, personally, existentially. Buzz Aldrin spiraled into depression and alcoholism. Others described profound disorientation, a feeling of having seen something so vast and so alien that ordinary life could never feel the same again. Act 5, The Fall. Back to you. It's 1975 now. The Apollo program is officially dead. The last Saturn V has been parked. Your team has been cut by 60%. The guys you used to solve impossible equations with at 2 a.m. are now selling insurance or teaching high school physics. You stay at NASA, you work on Skylab, you work on the shuttle. You tell yourself the moon was just phase 1. Phase 2 is coming. Mars, permanent lunar bases, orbital cities. The future is just delayed, not canceled. But the years keep passing. The shuttle flies, and it's impressive, but it never leaves low Earth orbit. It circles Earth at 250 miles up, a fraction of the 238,000 miles to the moon. It's like buying a Ferrari to drive circles around your driveway. Then Challenger explodes in 1986. 7 people die, including a school teacher. Then Columbia breaks apart on re-entry in 2003. 7 more. The shuttle program gets canceled in 2011. Every decade, a new president announces a bold plan to go back to the moon. Every decade, it gets quietly shelved, defunded, or redesigned into something unrecognizable. In Constellation, Artemis, new names, new logos, same story. The budget never shows up. The political will evaporates the moment the cameras turn off. And here's the gut punch. Today, NASA's budget is less than 0.5% of the federal budget. In the Apollo years, it was 4.5%. You do the math. America didn't just stop going to the moon. It decided the moon wasn't worth going to. Meanwhile, the institutional knowledge is gone. The engineers who built the Saturn V are dead or retired. The manufacturing tooling was destroyed. The supply chains dissolved. If you wanted to build a Saturn V today, you literally couldn't. The blueprints exist, but the entire ecosystem that turned those blueprints into a flying rocket has vanished. We didn't just leave the moon, we burned the bridge behind us. Act 6, the realization. You're old now, it's 2024. You're sitting in your living room, watching a live stream on a screen that would have looked like alien technology in 1969. NASA's Artemis program is promising again to send humans back to the moon. The budget is a fraction of what Apollo had. The rocket, the SLS, costs roughly $4.1 billion per launch. The timelines keep slipping. The target date for landing astronauts has been pushed back again and again. And you realize something that took you 60 years to understand. We didn't stop going to the moon because we ran out of money. We didn't stop because of radiation or risk or politics. Those were all real, but they were all solvable. We stopped because we never actually cared about the moon. Not really. We cared about winning. And once we won, the moon became just another line item in a budget that had bigger problems to fund. The greatest achievement in human history was treated like a marketing campaign. It had a launch date, a target demographic, and a cancellation once the ratings dipped. You look at the moon through your window. Same moon that's been up there for 4.5 billion years. Same moon that 12 men walked on, and nobody has touched since. And you wonder, what if Kennedy had said, go to the moon and stay? What if the mission had been not just to plant a flag, but to build a future? What would the world look like now if we'd kept going? There might be lunar bases right now, mining operations pulling helium-3 from the regolith, launch pads for Mars missions, a permanent human presence on another world, not science fiction, and not a dream, an actual functioning extension of civilization. Instead, we have 2 Saturn V rockets slowly weathering in the open air, and a generation of children who think the moon landing might have been faked, because to them, the idea that we went there and just stopped is so absurd that it's easier to believe it never happened at all. That's the real tragedy. Not that we stopped going to the moon, but that the reason we stopped is so deeply, pathetically human. We got bored. We got cheap. We declared victory and went home. And the moon is still up there, silent, waiting, covered in boot prints that will last 1,000,000 years because there's no wind to erase them. 12 sets of footprints on a world we abandoned, like a house you built but never moved into. And every night it rises. And it asks the same question it's been asking since December 1972. Are you coming back? That wraps it up for today. The facts in this video are real, but the character's journey is a work of narrative fiction designed to put you inside the story. If this one made you think, drop a comment and let me know your biggest takeaway. I've got more deep dives like this coming, so hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them. See you in the next one.